I love it. Well, so it's fair time, right? Fair time. Does that mean the other 50 weeks of the year is unfair time? Okay, so now is the fair time. This is the greatest time to be here. So um, I'd like to introduce my wife, Carissa, who's with me today. And we've been married almost 30 years, and it's a privilege to serve together. Me as the preacher, she is the teacher. So we've served in a number of different areas around the North American division, but back in Mid-America, we're both graduates of Union, and I have to pause because now it's called Union Adventist University. That's more of a mouthful than Union College, but it's great to be back in Lincoln and back in Mid-America. I am excited to hear about your teen Bible study. That is fantastic. I'm assuming that a couple of our teens are here with us today, right? Yeah, the ones that eat all the food, right? Keep at it. Keep at it. Yeah, enjoy all those calories when it doesn't matter. So at some point later in life, it starts to matter. But anyway, so I'm speaking to those that are preteen, those that are teen, any post-teens out there today. Post-teens, yes, okay, post-teen. I want to focus in on the life of Daniel, the Old Testament prophetic book of Daniel, to which we as Seventh-day Adventists owe a great deal of our identity. Without the book of Daniel, and of course the book of Revelation, which we cut short that title of the book because it's the revelation of Jesus Christ, we wouldn't quite know who we are without the beautiful understanding that we have of the prophecies of Daniel and Revelation. But today I want to focus in on the life of Daniel, the character of Daniel and his three friends, and looking at principles for living in 2025. Because it seems like the older I get, the more complex our world has gotten. And I don't know if it's just a faulty memory, but it just seems like when I was a kid that you could play anywhere within a mile or two of your house and you were safe. You didn't have a cell phone with, mom and dad could look up your location to see where you were at, or text you it's time to come home. We would play until the streetlights came on, and then we knew it was time to go home. Those automatic, photo eyes, when it get dark enough, when those lights came on, we'd go home. And we live in much more complex times, but we see in the life of Daniel, I think for all of us, some principles for living. And I'm going to help you out a little bit. There's not going to be any graphics or anything on the screen, but we're going to look at the name Daniel, and letter by letter, we're going to unpack it here a little bit today. Are you ready? In Daniel chapter 1, we look at the discipline of Daniel. Now, that word discipline gets kind of a bad rap. When we think of discipline, sometimes we think of the negative, somebody got in trouble kind of discipline. But when you think about any regular habit is a discipline, something that you repeatedly do, something that you do to care for yourself. For, let's say, a college or Olympic athlete, their disciplines will include what they eat and how much exercise and weightlifting and all those sort of disciplines. And we see that in the life of Daniel and his three friends. As they are taken captive, we have to remind ourselves that the book of Daniel is of these characters in a time that was very difficult. It's hard to even relate now in 2025 what it means to live in such conditions, but again, without the normal freedoms that they had enjoyed perhaps as boys. But to be taken captive and taken to Babylon and to enter into a very, very, very different culture and belief system, and could or would they hold true to the things they learned as young men? Well, already it's no fair. It's no fair that you know the end of these stories. They're so familiar to us because Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, but they didn't know the end of these stories as they were living them out. And so we'll try to strap on their sandals and walk with them a few steps. And the first day at the Babylonian University, they go to the cafeteria and they realize that the food that's being served to them is not fit, not only for their human consumption and what's good to take into their body, but the food has been offered to idols. And by taking and eating, it's a sign of agreement with that whole system. And they know they cannot do this. It would be against everything they believe and know to be true about the God of heaven to give this sign of agreement to their Babylonian hosts. So Daniel graciously and I'm sure very respectfully approaches the director of the cafeteria and said, I'd invite you to take a little experiment with us for just 10 days if you'll allow for us to just eat haystacks and water, just for 10 days, haystacks and water for us, and you all can eat whatever this is and however it's been prepared, and but we'll just eat this simple diet of, well, what the Bible says, vegetables and water. I like haystacks, but anyway, just for 10 days and we'll see what happens. And well, it was granted to them because they thought, well, surely these delicacies are far better than this simple fare that they're suggesting. But Daniel 1 verse 15 says, at the end of the 10 days, their features appeared better and fatter in flesh. Now, those words, fatter, is a good thing. We tend to associate that with maybe a bad thing, but they appeared better and fatter in flesh than all the other young men who ate the portion of the king's delicacy. Something so simple in what they ate. We are told that whatever we do, whatever we eat or drink, do all for the glory of God. That's just what they were doing in the simplicity of living and eating their 3 squares a day. In chapter 2 of Daniel, chapter 2. When we think of Daniel 2, what do we think of but that dream that God sends to King Nebuchadnezzar? And how, have you ever had a dream that you knew you'd had a dream, but you couldn't really remember what the dream was? But Nebuchadnezzar knew it was very significant, and so he called his palace wise guys, his wise men, to try to help him interpret it. And he says, I've had a dream, and I cannot recall it, nor its interpretation. How can you guys help me? And of course, they could not help him. In fact, they even tricked the king, trying to ask him, well, what do you remember about the dream? And tell us what the dream was, and we'll interpret it for you. Oh, no. I can't even remember this dream. And, well, they recall that Daniel was gifted in many things, one of them being the interpretation of dreams. And so Daniel is called to aid in this situation. And we know King Nebuchadnezzar is not a very patient man. When he doesn't get his way, well, he just loses it and gets angry and does crazy things. And, well, he does so in this instance as well. But we see Daniel approaching, again, very respectfully and saying, well, there is not a person that can know and interpret this dream, but the God of heaven can. Because in this time of crisis, when Nebuchadnezzar had in his anger had sent out word that unless his dream could be interpreted, bad things would happen. In Daniel 2:28, it says, "But there is a God in heaven who reveals secrets. He knows." Even during our prayer time a few moments ago, many of the requests and burdens of our hearts are physical in nature, and yet beyond our full control. I mean, we can do a lot of the right things. We can seek treatment and we can do many things as stewards of our health. But again, we recognize that there are things only in the control of God. And Daniel is even giving the credit before he gives the interpretation. But God has made known to you, King Nebuchadnezzar, what will be in the future. This is a very important dream that you had while you were laying on your bed and these visions were given to you. And Daniel begins to describe this tremendous image, this giant metal man, if you will. And I imagine Nebuchadnezzar heard it like this. While you were sleeping, King Nebuchadnezzar, you saw this image whose head was of gold. And that's you, O king. You are the head of gold. Blah, 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 blah. I don't think he heard anything more beyond that. The chest and arms of silver and the belly of brass and the legs of iron and you know the story. And oh, that rock of ages that finishes the story, that kingdom that fills the earth that lasts forever. Oh, Nebuchadnezzar didn't even hear the rest of that story, I don't think. But again, Daniel explains that the God of heaven has revealed in that time and to the king and indeed to all of us what would be. In Daniel's life, we see him seeking perfect alignment with the awesomeness of God. It is a holy thing to realize the limitations of our humanity and the awesomeness of God. There are things that are our jobs, and there are things that are God's job. You ever tried to do God's job? I have, and I've often messed it up. Again, Daniel aligned his life with the awesomeness of God. Well, in Daniel chapter 3, it kind of sets Daniel to the side. It focuses on his three friends because Daniel had a network of close friends. How important do you think friendships are? Extremely important. I agree. We discovered this 4 or 5 years ago, did we not? As we had this, I don't know even what to call it these days, but it was a time of isolation. It was a time of fear and unknown, and I think it was the friendship connections that many of us enjoy as being a part of a church family and a part of a community that supports and cares and has concern for us. There were many who go to work and come back home that really don't have those meaningful connections, and they struggled. They struggled during that time, but we see the story shift to Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the three good buddies, the three amigos, if you will. And in chapter 3, we see Nebuchadnezzar interpreting that dream a little differently than he was told by erecting an image entirely made of gold. Okay, Nebuchadnezzar, all right, you're the man, you're the big dude, you're the king of the world, literally. So he erects this 60 by 6. You notice those dimensions. Interesting that it's 60 cubits tall, 6 cubits wide, the number 6 being the number of man. Again, this had no reflection of the image that he had been shown or of God. It was specifically an image to man. In fact, the face, we're told, looked a little bit like Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, you might as well go all out, right? And the command goes out, again, you know the story, that when the orchestra plays, when the trumpets and the violins and the drums and whatever instruments they had at the time, I'm not sure if they had tambourines, they might have had timpanis, they might have had tubas, I don't know. But when the music plays, the command went out that what does everybody have to do? They got to bow down. They've got to bow down in worship of this image that Nebuchadnezzar has set up. We would call that simply false worship. There is nowhere in our understanding of God, and certainly of Bible history, this was not the first time that people had bowed down to a golden image. One that I can think of was an image of a calf that they were dancing around. And when Moses came and they ground it all up and said, no, there's none of that. None of that. Well, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they know that they can't bow to this image. And I want to say that they're probably not teenagers, but still young adult men. And I imagine that their friendship, the three of them, made it that much easier to stand strong for what they knew was right. Not standing by themselves, but standing as a trio in the fellowship, in the friendship of one another. Are you going to bow down? No, I'm not going to bow. Are you going to bow? No. So when the music plays, this entire congregation of people bow down to the ground except for those three. And I say, right on. Those faithful witnesses, all they did was stand. Didn't need to have a big speech. They were testifying that there was only one true God. Well, Nebuchadnezzar, not being the patient person, says, are you kidding me? These three, maybe they didn't understand. And so the command goes out a second time. I'll give you one more shot. And I'm sure somebody near them would say, hey guys, at least bend down and tie your shoe or something, because the penalty of not bowing down to the image is what? Oh, you do know this story. The very oven that had baked the bricks that built that huge kingdom was lit ablaze, ready for anyone who didn't bow down to this image. So again, not to make light of this situation, but these young men's lives are on the line. And yet the conviction of their hearts, bolstered, I think, by the faith they shared, the three of them, said, no, there's no way we can bow down to this image. So the music plays once again, and everyone else but those three bow down. So the king calls them, and in verse 16 to 18 of chapter 3, we see Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answering the king, saying, oh, Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this is the case, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us. Do you agree? I think this is a statement that all of us, again, recognizing the awesomeness of God and the frailty, the limitations of our humanity, our God is able to deliver us, they say. That's a statement of faith. But where it really matters is in the second part of that phrase. Our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning, fiery furnace. And He will deliver us from your hand, they say. So they first focus on the awesomeness of God, that He is able. Then they add, and He will deliver us from your hand. But if not, okay, now we're getting serious. Because I believe to live in the times that we are now living, as we are each day closer to the soon return of Jesus Christ, we need that kind of but if not kind of faith. Not the, I'm praying, but, most of the money has come in and I think it's going to be fine given what I can see and what I know. This is leaving the outcome in the capable hands of God, who is able, but saying, even if He chooses not, in His divine wisdom and understanding of everything, which goes way beyond my understanding, whatever God chooses to do in this moment, let it be known, O king. We don't serve the false gods, that the God of heaven is the one we serve. We can't, this microphone is going to drive me crazy. We will not worship the image that you have set up. It's not in us. We cannot do it. Well, again, we know the rest of the story, but these three men are indeed thrown into that fiery furnace. The God who's able to deliver them doesn't appear to be delivering them. As all the witnesses are in full view, and the guards that are taking them toward the furnace perish for the heat that's coming out of that thing, those three go into the fire. What does that look like in your life? It sure would be nice if from mountaintop to mountaintop there weren't a valley in between. And yet, hasn't God promised to be with us in the valley? The Lord is my shepherd. I have everything I need. Well, indeed, the three Hebrews are thrown into the fiery flames, but it's Nebuchadnezzar who looks into the blaze and sees four people. Now, this is true miracle stuff here. I mean, we can kind of look to the grit and the strength of these young men's faith, but we then see Jesus. I believe it's Jesus himself right there in the flames with them. And the king is the one who calls it out. Jesus is with us. And this network of friends, this fellowship of faith is what bolsters them on. In Daniel chapters 4 and 5, we see some unusual stories. Oftentimes when we're thinking of the stories of Daniel, we jump from the fiery furnace to the lion's den. And well, we will get there and conclude there. But in chapter 4, we see another dream. Nebuchadnezzar has another dream, and this time it appears he can remember some details of it, but has no idea what it means. It's the vision of a tree, something we can all relate to. And the beauty and the grandeur of this tree, well, it provides shade for the animals and a place for nests, and it provides food. And it just seems that from this tree, all life is protected and provided for. And again, Daniel says, well, Nebuchadnezzar, you're this tree. And at first that seems, well, that's pretty cool. But the tree is chopped down. The tree is obliterated. Again, like that great stone cut without hands that strikes the feet of the image. This tree, O Nebuchadnezzar, you're about to lose your kingdom. And there's a chain or a golden band that's set that binds the stump of this tree. As Daniel explains that Nebuchadnezzar is about to have about a 7-year camp out. 7 years. That's a long time to give a man to think. That's a long time to live out in the wild like an animal when you've had all the pleasures and privileges of the palace. No, none of that. Now, what Willis and I can't relate to is how long his hair grew during that time. And his nails like the talons of an eagle, right? Oh, what a sight Nebuchadnezzar must have been at the end of that 7 years. But I'm thankful for this testimony of a pagan king who finds God. At the end of chapter 4, we see in verse 34, at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar lifted my eyes to heaven. Oh, this is a turning point. This is a conversion story, almost like Paul's, and it's how drastic it was from this selfish and proud Nebuchadnezzar who said, is this not Babylon that I have built? He had an I problem. Oh, but not now. It took 7 years. Now, what was Daniel's role during this time? But for King Nebuchadnezzar to step aside and let God do what God needed to do in Nebuchadnezzar's heart. Couldn't interfere, couldn't deliver him, had to let it go. And yet there seems to have been relative peace at the palace during this 7-year time. Scripture's silent on that point. But it's Nebuchadnezzar who lifts his eyes to heaven as his understanding returns to him, and he blesses the Most High and praises and honors God who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion. These are the words of Nebuchadnezzar, and his kingdom is from generation to generation. And what he is saying is, not mine, but God's. Well, in chapter 5, we often hear the phrase or think of the phrase, the handwriting on the wall. You have some handwriting on this wall that I like very much. Amazing grace. I love that. I love that. Well, it's a banquet. It's a time of a new administration. It's all many things, but there's a message of judgment that appears on the wall that needs, once again, Daniel's interpretation. We jump quickly to Daniel chapter 5, verse 22, and then also 26 to 28. As Daniel, now speaking to King Belshazzar, saying, you know, you knew your dad's story. You knew this kingdom's history and even its future, although you refuse to believe. In other words, Daniel is saying, you knew all this stuff and yet chose not to humble your heart. This is the interpretation. God has numbered your kingdom and finished it. You're done. And you've been weighed in the balances and found wanting. And thirdly, your kingdom has been divided and given to the Medes and the Persians. Well, this is right out of Daniel chapter 2 from decades before. We see that being fulfilled, and we see Belshazzar and the rest of his kingdom not wanting to humble their hearts, but Daniel keeps his ego in check. Well, we jump quickly to the final and probably most familiar story of Daniel. He's most certainly a post-teen at this point in his life, perhaps in his 80s. We don't know exactly his age, but we see not just a messenger, not just an interpreter of dreams, but someone who lived out their faith by their own daily practices and disciplines and alignment to the awesomeness of God. Late in life, when Daniel's godly presence was a threat to the other leaders who conspired against him by tricking the king to sign a law that no one can pray to any other god except the king. This is really no different than an image in an orchestra, but once again, Daniel and all those are commanded to pray only to the king. Would Daniel follow this newly signed decree or continue to allow God to handle things in the way he has in the past, even when faced with betrayal and politics and the threat of punishment? What do we see Daniel do? Daniel 6 and verse 10. Now, when Daniel knew that the writing was signed, sealed, and delivered, the law was the law. Even the king himself couldn't change it once it's signed. And of course, the law called that for 30 days, no one can pray to any other god except the king, or else what? The den of lions was awaiting. Well, Daniel hears of this law being signed, and so he went home and he went to his upper room. And with his windows open toward Jerusalem, he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks before his God, as was his custom since early days. That, I believe, is one of the greatest secrets to Daniel's life, was his prayer connection with God that came as natural as breakfast, lunch, and dinner. 3 times every day, no matter what. We might call it a habit or a discipline or whatever it was, but as was his custom, we see Daniel living out his faith in honoring God before honoring others. Even at the threat of death, we see him living out his faithfulness to God. This ultimate test where again, his life was on the line and he knew it. And yet he thought of the faith of his 3 friends years ago. And I remember looking toward that fiery furnace, and you could barely look directly at it, like the sun. It was so hot and bright. And yet my God delivered them. I think we see that right here in the text. I don't think I'm imagining it. As he knelt down on his knees 3 times that day and prayed and gave thanks. I think an attitude of thankfulness, of gratitude, is rehearsing the things that God has already done for you. It's reminding yourself, because God, of course, his knowledge is perfect, doesn't need to be reminded, and yet in that thanksgiving before God, I think Daniel's faith was strengthened. He prayed and gave thanks. Well, not even the king can erase this decree which he's been tricked into signing. So the king gave the command, and they brought Daniel, and, well, they cast him into the den of lions. Just like our 3 friends who get cast into the fiery furnace, there goes Daniel into the den of lions. But it's the king who says, "Oh, Daniel, your God, whom you serve continually, he will deliver you." What a command the king is making, regretting the signing of this silly law that now means the death of Daniel. But it's his testimony as Daniel is being led away. Your God, whom you serve faithfully, will deliver you. So Daniel's thrown into the lion's den, which causes one to question why we use this as a bedtime story for our kids. But once again, God does not prevent Daniel from being thrown into, but delivers him from the lion's den. The king didn't sleep very well that night, if at all, while I imagine Daniel with those giant purring kittens. And it's the words of the king, once again, as he rushes out to the lion's den. "Daniel, has your God delivered you?" Daniel 6:22 says, "My God." We can't just skip over that to get to the punchline, but Daniel says, "My God," which each of us have the privilege to say as sons and daughters of the Most High, saved by the grace of Jesus, brought into a brother and sisterhood of faith on this journey toward heaven. We can say, "My God, my personal Savior." My God sent his angel, shut the lions' mouths, so that they have not hurt me. Now, that's the simple fact, as Daniel is testifying of the awesomeness of God and how he's been delivered, but he wants to make sure the king understands full well what's been going on here. So I'll read the whole text. Daniel 6:22. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, so they have not hurt me, because I was found innocent before him. And also, O king, I have done no wrong before you. This again reveals the alignment of Daniel's life in first, foremost, and always honoring God, and then seeking to cooperate and be a blessing to, but when you set up laws around me that don't honor God, I can't do them. I simply can't. What seems like a hard decision becomes very easy because of Daniel's vertical alignment with God. His horizontal alignment with others is put to correct light. Daniel fed his soul through prayer and personal devotion to God, especially in a time of crisis and threats upon his life. That's really the final and best secret we see of Daniel's lived out experience of his faith in God. So as review, we see that if we dare to be a Daniel, it will include discipline and care of ourselves, aligning ourselves with Almighty God, having a network of godly friends, and identifying how God is working in the lives of others while keeping our own ego in check, and then living out our faith in devotion with God. And each of those words, I'm hoping we kind of spell the name Daniel. I'm so thankful for the honesty of Scripture. Moses was not a perfect dude. And no, I'm not going to rehearse a whole, but Abraham was not a perfect dude. And while we see in the life of Joseph so many incredible attributes, it's also Daniel, in whom it's difficult to find fault, but he was still human, just like you and I. We see in such perilous and troublesome times, his faithfulness to God became that much more important, to glorify and to communicate that when you follow God, he will lift you up. I'm so grateful for these secrets of Daniel, and while very grateful for the prophecies of Daniel, today I hope you can join me as well in being thankful for the life and example of Daniel.